about if these were places of worship that were used by a lot of people, it's highly unlikely there was some low ground cover that covered the place. And today there's a sense of real manicuring, and the care is very good, but I looked at it and I thought of our southern swept yards. What if this was packed earth because people were there every day doing their worships and making obeisances and paying attention to their religious work? That it would have a very different look. So if the archaeology moved into the area of botanical remains, pollen, opophytolith, macrobotanical, when you find a clean 13th century layer of soil, can you glean from it information that you can either use to reconfigure some or all or some part or some example, or learn from and use to think about? We did a project at Thomas Jefferson's Poplar Forest, and Jefferson had written a letter to his caretaker at Poplar Forest, which was his retreat, to say, I'm experimenting with these things, and what I'd like you to do is plant 4 types of shrubs in this line to the north of my retreat house. So we had this documentary record. The archaeologists developed a hypothesis of their archaeological design that was able by pollen counts to discredit the high counts of grasses and trees and focus on trying to find the evidence for those 4 shrubs. They found it. And they used a fairly, interesting and customized technique in order to find it. So what they gained was 2 primary sources of information from the time that they could work with. And one of the things that I've heard going around Sisachinalai and Sukhothai is that usually there's one source of information and it's a documentary record and it's incomplete. So it behooves you to try and find other ways to document that historical knowledge. And I think that this kind of scientific study that you would pursue over a long period of time, you could use it as like the latest breaking news from the process. But a thought I had when I looked at the main Buddha was, what if this Buddha was surrounded by, or had edges where you could stand, where there was the water of a rice paddy and the reflection twice? That would really change the quality of that place. So ground penetrating radar might tell you if you had soil layers of clay that were holding paddies, and you would see, there would be a point where you would come to Sukhothai to see the full moon reflected in the rice paddy.
Yeah, I mean, as was mentioned earlier, actually quite a number of these studies were done. I was in Bangkok at the time, but that was over about 10 years ago. And there was concern that the site, the archaeological interpretation of the site had been damaged or distorted through the kind of manicure approach. So there were pollen analysis, there was analysis of the irrigation techniques, great research done that then stayed in journals and stayed in people's shelves and stayed in the minds of a few academics, and never actually got out there and transformed it into concrete management issues for working back into the site. So that's the reality of what happened. So we come down to how do we then take this knowledge, how do we take this knowledge, transfer it so that we have, say, transport systems that also integrate this knowledge into it. We are not disconnecting samples that were meant to be connected, that were designed to try to hold, and something that is connected because there's a nice little road going forward when we train. I mean, these kinds of things we do need to be careful about. And the challenge is not necessarily doing research. The challenge is connecting the research with the management, with the community, and all of these different things coming together. So the research is only one part of the overall approach. So it's still going on. And I think today, as part of the process, it's been a long time since that's been discussed here. And it was discussed a lot 10 years ago, so let's hope that this can start the ball rolling again, so that we can bring all of these elements together and start doing that.
I really quickly add that was an interesting point, talking about the transportation system. I hadn't thought about that, but over in Chandeli, the road system that's there looks somewhat integrated, and a lot of it is actually lined with the stones. And so I was looking at it, and I couldn't tell, is this a new road or an old road? I don't know. And so, again, thinking about that, even as you design those inside the park, because I thought, well, it seems like a logical place for a road, but I couldn't tell whether it was new and they just decided to do it that way to integrate and make it look better, or it was actually a historical road. So that's a very good point, and to take the ecology and integrate it into the transportation system.
Ian, Ajahn Yongtanit, and I saw some hands there from Ireland. So Ian, Ajahn Yongtanit and Ireland.
I would like to pick up on Dr. Tim's point about connecting research to the people. And what we realize is the discussion today is on two levels. One is on site interpretation for the tourists, which is very basic and probably accessible to anyone that comes. The other level, which we talked about, is really doing deep research onto the landscape, onto the historical evidence of the site. However, there's a disconnect between the two, simply because how do you interpret this very vast, profound information and feed it to tourists who only has a few hours on the site? So a lot of the travel nowadays is not just in situ travel. We talk about pre-travel, in situ travel, and post-travel. So how do we actually use pre-travel and post-travel as a way to communicate these ideas of information sharing? So I watch a lot of TV, and if you watch BBC, they have a lot of historical dramas, historical documentaries, reenactments, recreations of these sites. So you don't really have to go down to England or any part of UK, but you know all about these places, these historical routes, bridges, and things like that, simply because mass media, popular media, has done the work for us in transmitting all this information. So I'm trying to see if there is a possibility in Southeast Asia to have this sort of technology, to have this sort of expertise, to really translate very complex issues and understanding about history into something that we could actually just broadcast to people so that they can understand such complex issues. And just the last point, the pre-travel and the post-travel shouldn't be seen as two different stages. See it almost like a matrix, because the post-travel experiences of someone that is put on the internet is really the pre-travel information for someone that's coming here. So everything is really like a complex web. And how do we control this information? I think that is a question that we really have to answer in terms of top-down management or bottom-up activism.
I think that we have some media princes here. You should talk to Ivan. He puts everything on Facebook with thousands of followers. So,
can we go to Ivan first and then come back to the table?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I mean, I think we need to also be careful, and I really appreciate we need to take research back into the science. But I think we also need to be careful about how we take that research back into the science, because what we do scientifically, I'm sure Patricia will agree with me, everything we find out about the historic landscape can't be recreated. It's not right. It shouldn't be. And shouldn't be. And there are things that have happened since, like shade trees that people appreciate and all that. And the landscape will have changed and evolved many times. I think it's an interesting issue about quarries, for example, at one of the sites. And again, quarries look much nicer when they're grown over and greened rather than exposed as they were, and to maintain it. So I think there's very interesting. We have to be careful about. It's not just this is what we found, therefore we implement it in those layers. But I think also to look at the research, the economic value of research, and focusing research here, and how that research can go beyond just looking at the past, but whether that research, and I'm not an expert in this field, but how can that research into past agriculture also inform current agricultural practices, current grains, and things. So you create a very strong research base that's way beyond tourism, and it doesn't, in every detail, have to be communicated to tourism. But actually brings an economic development value, both in agricultural development in locality, as well as bringing scientists in, and that has an economic impact of having a strong research basis within a region.
Okay. Maria and Russell, and then, okay.
Maria and Russell.
Yeah, thanks. I would like for a moment to go back to this big image. One of the main difficulties we had during these 2 days is really to imagine how this region could evolve during the next years. I would like just to give two totally opposite and eventually not really probable scenario, but I will try to extrapolate in order to imagine two possible situations. One scenario could be a scenario that we could call empty meeting grounds, a scenario of desertification, a scenario in which this region will be a shrinking region, losing its inhabitants, eventually desertified, with the agriculture going down, etc., etc. The other scenario would be the opposite one, which will bring this region in the very center of this big integrated region of the southeast countries in Asia. And in the very center means also that these heritage resources will be really in the center of a very huge tourism demand, which is probably not the case right now. It's not about doing forecasting, it's about shaping future and trying to see through these extreme scenarios. Of course, the cursor could move and could stop at the point that is really wanted today. The question is, in fact, what is the optimum scenario? And I don't have the feeling that we started from this, how can I say, more geopolitical and economical approach. What is the optimum scenario? And what is the role that heritage and heritage tourism could play in this optimum scenario? And I think this is really an issue because, yes, I mean, it's important to develop the site. It is